We have great pleasure today of welcoming Simone LeAmon and Ewan McEoin to the Design and Dialogue series today. And Ewan, I know that you'd like to start off with an acknowledgement of the land from which you are speaking, which of course is in Australia. So would you like to begin with that?
Thank you, Glenn. It's wonderful to be with you tonight. Look, on behalf of Simone and myself, it's customary that I would acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we are right now. Simone's obviously at her place and I'm at my place, but we're both on Wurundjeri country, the Wurundjeri of the Kulin Nation, and we both pay our respects to the traditional owners of this land and Torres Island and Indigenous owners and First Nations people throughout Australia. And we acknowledge that they've been successfully living, designing, making architecture on this land for over 60,000 years. And I suppose it's worth reflecting on that duration and thinking what that might mean to us today.
Yeah. That's an important context for our conversation about contemporary design, and I know we'll be coming back to forms of Indigenous knowledge later on in the conversation. Likewise, although I realize that we're all feeling like we're in no space at all because we're on Zoom. Of course, this is all happening in real time, and obviously the ground that Friedman Benda sits on, as well as where I'm sitting here in the Hudson River Valley, was also the ancestral home for centuries and indeed millennia by various native groups, and I would also like to acknowledge them here. So thank you for that. I'm actually going to go ahead and start our slideshow because we have so many images to look at, which is super. As we just get started, I also wanted to just ask Simone and Ewan if you could just tell us a little bit about the state of the NGV Melbourne and the community there, given that the pandemic, of course, has come to Australia like everywhere else. And I know that actually the NGV is not open to the public at the moment, is that right?
That's correct, Glenn. Look, I'll kick off. The gallery is currently closed, and we're in stage 4 restrictions in Melbourne, which means that we can leave our houses for 1 hour a day for exercise within 5 kilometres of our home. But I must say that Australia at a federal government, state government level has been extremely well organised, and the gallery closed early in March. As part of our initiative to kind of help address the situation, and it looks like it's all heading in the right direction, and we hope to be open again soon.
Great. Okay, that's great to hear.
And
yes, Simone.
And Glenn, I think just to add to that, Ewan and I would just like to send our best wishes and just acknowledge, all of our peers and friends and colleagues and everybody sort of around the world that's been doing it really tough. And our hearts go out to everybody.
Yeah, it has indeed been a very stressed time for lots of institutions. And one of the things I love about the Design and Dialogue series is just that it's been able to shine a light on what people have been doing and what they're continuing to think about during this period of time. And that certainly will be true for our conversation. Just to dive in, one of the really striking things about the NGV is that it's a place where design and fine art are presented really on not only level terms, but really as part of one continuum of creativity. And I wonder if we could begin just by starting a conversation about that. So how is design treated at NGV? How do you view it as a discipline? And maybe give us a little bit of a sense of your personal backgrounds and how you became involved there.
Simone, why don't you kick off?
Ewan? Sure. Well, I guess it's rather important to note that our department, the Department of Contemporary Design and Architecture, we're only 5 years old. So previous to that, the other department, the youngest department was photography, and that was formed in 1969. But I guess under the leadership of Tony Elwood, the director, the last 6 years, there's been an incredible, if you like, resurgence of acknowledging contemporary practice. And so when our department was formed, we just moved in right beside contemporary art and then the other 9 curatorial departments. And so I guess there's no hierarchy. We have to collaborate and work with all of our peers, and I guess design and architecture has been embraced as we are the new kids on the block, but that also means that it's really exciting for the organisation, and yeah, we've been able to manage sort of to deliver a really exciting program without dedicated galleries. You know, we've managed to find a way to program, present, and I guess deliver a whole heap of auxiliary programs such as Melbourne Design Week. So we probably behave a little bit more entrepreneurially than the other departments, and that's probably just a consequence of our backgrounds too.
Yeah, could you
Ewan, did you want to add?
I'm curious about your backgrounds because you come from two different vantage points into the NGV.
I mean, Simone is I can say this, but she can't, perhaps. Simone is one of Australia's most accomplished designers herself, award-winning designer, and effectively left her own independent practice to come and join the gallery. And I had my own practice doing, running biennial festivals and doing design strategy, and after running the Asia Pacific Design Triennial, which was in Brisbane, I met Tony Elwood, and when Tony came to head up the NGV, he invited us both to sort of to come in and start working with them. And I suppose the potential in terms of the opportunity, but also the ambition of really creating the first place for design to be presented on a level at which it deserved, both international design and Australian design. We both relish the idea of jumping in there, and yeah, I suppose we've had to work with the institution and with a great group of supporters and philanthropy and other partners to sort of create a new space and to really build something off the back of, I must acknowledge, you know, a fantastic collecting area in decorative arts, especially international decorative arts at the institution, which is, there's an amazing collection. It just didn't, it really wasn't engaging within the contemporary period.
I see.
Yeah, it kind of finished at about 1980. So I guess our remit as a department is to look at work from 1980 to the present and into the future. That might shift, you know, as the decades along, but I guess in essence, yeah, we work very closely with decorative arts, but contemporary art, and indeed all of the departments.
And can you just say a little bit about the situation in Australia more generally with regard to institutional supportive design? I think most people in America and those listening in Europe as well and elsewhere will be aware of the powerhouse in Sydney. I happen to know from my own area of research that craft has been a big part of the Australian story. I think of curator Robert, who was a great craft, passed away.
Yeah.
But what's the great big view of design and how it's presented in institutions?
Well, I guess each of the state galleries, the curatorial departments, I guess, are structured a little bit differently. So what we might see as contemporary design or contemporary craft might have been collected within Australian art or international art. It didn't necessarily have there's not necessarily dedicated departments in, I guess, our allied state institutions. So the curators have to work really hard and they have to cover a lot of ground, and it's very hard for them to become, should I say, domain experts, and I guess necessarily invest that curatorial activity in contemporary sort of practice and really look at how it's sort of evolving, shifting, moving. And I guess that's what we relish, because that's what we can really indulge in doing. But another thing to note, you know, in Australia, the crafts councils, each state and territory has had a crafts council, and while they've rebranded and renamed themselves, you know, many times over the years, they were always considered to be the home of programming and presentation, because they all have dedicated spaces. So they kind of really carried, I guess, the charter, if you like, to present contemporary craft and design, but they weren't necessarily connected to the big collecting institutions. And I guess that's what is really significant when you're aligned with, say, in the NGV, because you get to collect and build collection, which, you know, the state crafts councils didn't have the remit to do, or the capability to do, because they are often relying on small bursaries or small amounts of funding from various state and philanthropic, you know, centres, I guess.
And I know that, of course, Australian does have a very vibrant design culture, and Simone, you're a great example of that as a practitioner. But my sense is that one of the big mandates for the two of you has been to connect that that Australian, New Zealand design culture to an international design community. Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah. Look, I think, Glenn, I mean, you're right. I mean, that's basically, I suppose, most of my career. I mean, I came out through design journals to then curating. I mean, maybe we think back to the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, the industry in Australia. I mean, Australia's got a very buoyant and very well-respected architecture community globally. And of course, a lot of fantastic crafts practitioners acknowledged internationally. But the thing that we've really seen evolve over the last couple of decades is that independent practice around design output, and the shift away. I suppose there was and Simone's probably a good example of this. There was a preoccupation with designers trying to exhibit in Milan and get picked up by international companies. And what we've seen really over the last decade is a dramatic shift to a very buoyant studio culture in Australia, a really strong community of independent design practices which are working commercially and servicing that architectural community. There's a really strong relationship between restaurant culture in Australia, interior culture, architecture and design, and we've both been very much engaged in trying to facilitate that and provocate, you know, that sort of sense of maybe independence and charting your own course, and not just sort of, I mean, we're a long way from Europe. It's a lot of effort to be successful on the international stage, but actually we have a really great design community, and people are making a good living from making very successful work. I think when Simone and I opened the department, we felt that the only thing that was missing perhaps was this sense of a deep sort of critical investigation into design. So with that really strong commercial community, we thought, well, then the next layer for that is really, and it's sort of in a way a point that any industry needs to get to, is that sense of reflecting on itself, and then looking at the problems that we could solve together that are beyond that more traditional sort of practice arena.
And I guess the other really important thing is that, you know, I think it's really only been in the last decade that, say, design has been really embraced in the conversation as cultural production. So, you know, there's so many of us would love traveling overseas, because we could really engage in discourses around how design, you know, it's not just commercially engaged, but it's culturally engaged. And I guess what we've been doing over the last 5 years is, you know, introducing more of that conversation into the community, and I guess allowing local designers to explore that as a valid side of their practice. Because, you know, if design isn't represented in your greatest cultural institutions, and there's no environment of conversation around it, well, then it sort of is homeless in a sense. And I think that's really been the condition for many, many decades here in Australia. There was great production, but it just didn't have a home. There was no platform for it to be presented. And so the conversations too around designers sort of didn't really know sort of how to talk about their work, or who to talk their work to, you know, who they could talk to their work about. So that's kind of shifting now. We're seeing it shift all across Australia, I think, and that's really exciting.
Right. Well, that brings us very neatly to this sort of mission statement that you provided for us, which gives a description of the...
That's
sorry,
Ewan hammering something out.
Yeah. I think, I mean, yeah, our mission really, I mean, it's also not just about, this is very important for us, is that it's not about Australian design being, you know, it's not a regionally specific idea. You know, our vision as an institution is to represent the most interesting work that is going on today from the contemporary period. And what we, I mean, so that's contemporary art and design. We're very much engaged in exhibitions and making and collecting, but also very engaged in commissioning work. And there's from the top of the institution right through these key departments, is this attitude of being engaged with artists and designers to help them to realize new, significant, ambitious work that, and perhaps the sort of understanding that that's, you know, there's a certain limitation that we see, certainly that Simone and I share, which is if you're only collecting what comes from industry, or what is produced within industry, then you're sort of bound to this sense of it's a retrospective act, and perhaps it's also bound within a commercial paradigm or a financial or logistic paradigm, which maybe limits designers. And we sort of questioned that very early on and thought, can we create a space where we can work with designers and be more generative and more kind of forward-looking? Because I suppose there is, I mean, we both share a sense of not only responsibility to the sector, but also a broader sense of agency. And with, you know, we think about the world as we all sit at home right now, ecological, social, political issues that design is attempting to engage with. Can we be more, you know, engaged with that ourselves and sort of create opportunities together with studios and other institutions to really have the conversations that we need to have right now. And I think we're both pretty impatient, so we don't want to just sort of wait for other people to maybe have those conversations somewhere else, and then we try and find them and then collect them and analyze them. It's a much more you know, forward focused kind of attitude that we try and have.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because Glenn, because Ewan and I haven't charted careers through these institutions, you know, when we found ourselves, you know, building department, having to build a collection from scratch, all of a sudden, you know, we were aware of the world of how, you know, a lot of contemporary art production gets, you know, traded and sold, and the fairs and you know, the system. But we realized when we went into the system that the works that we loved, we couldn't get our hands on, or by the time you did the currency exchange, the Australian dollar was just horrible. So we just kind of thought, well, hang on, we have really fabulous, engaging conversations with the designers that we're meeting. Why don't we invest in the conversations, invest in, you know, a period of time, and work towards, as Ewan said, this sort of generative curating that means that we might have to wait a couple of years, but what comes into the collection and ultimately what is presented is something that both the practitioner and us are really excited about, because we're both invested together on the journey.
I should say, Glenn, the images you're pulling up at the moment, I mean, this is Joris Laarman's bridge table. These are, when we opened the department, we definitely had a few designers who we thought, you know, that sort of fundamental question, you're building a collection, building on from the decorative arts, collecting up to 1980. We did a lot of sort of bringing the collection up to speed in a more traditional sense, but also really looking towards a few key designers around the world that we thought were really important to represent strongly in the collection. So there's a few images here. Joris Laarman, obviously, one of those, and and really that sort of
Yeah.
important story to tell about design and technology and robotic production, but also within his work, that sort of really interesting sense of his engagement with nature and the systems of nature, and how we draw from that through algorithms or others that are driving production. So, I mean, I think all of these people have that kind of, there's a connection there, that they're all engaged with thinking about the future. And so this is actually, this is the last triennial, 2017, the NGV Triennial, which is a big exhibition that we run every 3 years. This was the first one. And it was a great opportunity to bring in a sort of large collection of Joris's work, but also quite a few other key acquisitions. And we've been very lucky through having Neri Oxman's Vespers collection, which we have 10 of these masks in the permanent collection. We showed the whole collection in the triennial, but the opportunity to sort of acquire and build sort of some really key moments, I suppose, which is a huge opportunity to be able to have the resources to acquire that kind of work at this time.
It was pretty special. Ewan and I basically wrote a desiderata, a list on the back of an envelope, and said, okay, we have this moment, we have this opportunity. So we wrote a list, and these Joris, you know, we'd known about for a long time, Neri's work. And, you know, Ewan and I were given an opportunity to go and travel and to meet the designers, and basically pull, you know, rather quickly, a really strong collection of work, like, and they made a huge statement, you know, within the organisation, and they were really exciting, because I think they were acquisitions that really signalled to the rest of the organisation and to the whole, you know, everybody from our supporters and the philanthropists, you know, right through to audience, that, you know, design has arrived, and this is what we mean by design. This is what we mean. And everybody was just project, like, wow, don't know whether we understand it, but it's really exciting.
And this project is, I suppose, then the beginning of sort of embarking on this sense of commissioning major works. This is a collaboration between Yara Elter, which is an Indigenous art centre in Alice Springs, Elliot Rich, who lives out there, an Australian designer, and the Campana studio in Brazil, a whole kind of architectural scale craft project that's telling stories of river systems and our relationship to water within ecologies, and that sort of bringing together, starting to coalesce these sort of teams of international studios, local studios, production, thinking about. I mean, Simone and I both have a background in our own design studios, so you sort of engaging with production and the idea of creating an ecosystem where work can be made is kind of quite normal to us, and maybe something fairly unique, which we really enjoy, and beautiful projects where you sort of get people to come together over sometimes quite extended period to do really quite special work.
So could I ask a question about this project in particular, because it does feel quite like a special Australian story, that you're taking the Campana brothers, who of course in Brazil have their own extensive decades-long engagement with Indigenous craft communities there, and you're bringing them into contact with Indigenous craft capabilities and artistic resources in Australia. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about the idea of Indigenous knowledge and how it fits into the complex of design there, because it seems to me from an exterior perspective that Australia has a much more well-developed conversation about Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous art than perhaps the United States does. And I'd love to just get some insights from you about that.
I think we've got a really good example later on, which we can talk in more depth, that Simone, it's sort of like deep engagement within community, but certainly, I mean, there's a few distinctions which we found, which are sort of normal to us, but we found have been not that normal to international people who've come and worked with us. I mean, this project was an opportunity. Umberto Campana came and spent time with us in Australia. We traveled, and the idea was to go and look at who might be interested in collaborating with him as much as him collaborating with them. And Indigenous artists, so it was mostly female artists who made this work, but it's very important to note that in Australia, Indigenous artists, so people who would be perhaps treated as artisans or craftspeople in other places, are very much treated as contemporary artists and acknowledged, so that it's not, they're not making a work for someone, they're making a work with someone. And it's and so the engagement is on a is very much a collaboration. And this particular project, it's actually based on the Amazonian water lily, the pattern. And so it was a shared conversation about water, which Humberto had, and then very much he created a sort of armature to a great extent, and then the artists very much decided what stories they wanted to tell about from their own perspective, from their own location, and from their own history. And Elliot Rich, who is a designer based out in Alice Springs, this is right out in Central Australia. She sort of facilitated that process, but we worked with an art centre, so there's a sort of these are legal structures that are put in place to protect. Were originally put in place, I should say, to protect Indigenous art from being sort of exploited as a commercially, and to ensure that there's a sort of a really respectful and thoughtful way that that's done.
Well,
yeah,
and that I was just going to say we'll get back to that theme maybe a bit later on.
Yeah.
But let's look at a few more acquisitions.
Now, this is a brilliant work. This is by the Australian designer Brodie Neal. Brodie's been based in London for some time, and of course he went to the Rhode Island School of Design. But this is his gyro table that we were sort of, we didn't sort of commission it or fund it, but we were involved with it right from the very beginning, because we ran a design camp in Tasmania, and Brodie is originally from Hobart in Tasmania, and where we did the design camp was on a small island called Bruny Island, and Brodie just couldn't get over all of the plastic waste that was he was seeing sort of washing up on all of the shores of these once pristine beaches, and it really sparked a sort of an interest within him about ocean plastic. So this is the top of this table is made with, it's a terrazzo, and it comprises, you know, micro plastic that he's received from his very extensive network of people around the world that harvest the ocean plastic for him from their own beaches, send it to him in London, and he's been producing these tables. So this was the first one, and it was produced for the London Design Biennale, which we kind of helped him really sort of frame the proposition, alerted him to the fact that there was a table in the 19th century called a specimen table that used to have little pieces of, you know, ivory or marble or ebony. And so I guess he would then saw the typology of this round table or the specimen table, and I thought, well, how about I do a contemporary sort of interpretation, but using the ocean plastic to not only raise awareness of this issue, but also in some way raise some questions about the value that we place on plastic. And so it's this project, I think, from Brodie, because he was, of course, sort of noted for making exceptional objects and digital craft. And this has sort of thrown him into a field of where I guess he's sort of more critically engaged with the materials that he's working with. But it was the first of many projects that he's done since with the ocean plastic.
So it's a great example of how you work with designers in a kind of continuing conversational way. Here's a very important acquisition also that the NGV made, 50 manga chairs of Mendo.
I mean, I think this is this project sort of speaks for itself. I mean, just to be the one institution in the world that has these 50 chairs is just an amazing opportunity. And really, I mean, is it? I mean, that's sort of an acknowledgement, I suppose, of the great level of support that we have within the community to really make these significant and I must say it's part of the history of the NGV is great philanthropy that enables really significant international acquisitions, which maybe people sort of get a surprise sometimes, especially looking back in our historical collection. Sometimes people get a bit of a shock that you've got some pretty amazing stuff, and you're all the way in Australia.
Well, let's turn our attention to some of the commission we've done. So we'll start with this short video. Yeah.
Look, so this is Ore Streams by former Phantasma, Andrea and Simone, based in Amsterdam. And I think, I mean, pretty much when we started the department, Simone and I had identified a few studios that we thought, and we felt were the really exciting studios that we would just love to work with on something. And we approached former Phantasma and had a meeting with them in Amsterdam. And I suppose the conversation quite quickly turned to this. So we'd seen Botanica and other collections that they'd done. What for us was very important was this idea of a sort of research-based practice that had a material output, but there was a lot of thinking in the objects, and a lot of questions being asked within the objects. We had this conversation about what would it look like if we created a commission with enough resourcing to really give them a couple of years to do research and realize a body of work. And the outcome of that is Ore Streams, which the objects you see, office furniture with gold embedded within them from e-waste, but really a deep dive. Initially, we were looking at the idea of above ground mining and because Australia is our mining country, questioning that. And then, I mean, then they sort of focused in on the e-waste, and then not only the objects, but the most important part of this project, which is ongoing, I should say, and has travelled elsewhere in the world to be exhibited, is this investigation in how we might redesign electronics so that they can be more successfully recycled, taken to pieces, because there's not only ecological and political consequences from the beginning of electronics. We think about sourcing of gold and other rare earth minerals for electronics, but also the kind of ecological footprint at the end of life as well. And that sort of cycle, and I won't talk too much more about this one, but it really ignited for us, and I think for former Phantasma as well, a curiosity about supply chains and materials and the lack of transparency that exists in the world today as a kind of in the hinterland of design. All of the things that designers use and possibly have no idea where they come from or no idea where they're going to end up afterwards. And I suppose we're really questioning, you know, our role is to ask the question about how is that acceptable, and how do we move forward from that, and finding people who can help tell those stories in a really clear way, such as this fantastic studio.
So it's one of the things that the institution can do is bring some light and some explicitness to these things that are otherwise completely invisible to the public. And Australia is as good a place to do that as any, I suppose, being equally within the global supply chain. It strikes me that Australia does have a reputation from abroad as being something of an extraction-based economy. I think that was probably more true historically than it is now, but certainly this seems like a very appropriate subject to be staging at the NGV in that light.
Look, Glenn, I don't think it is I mean, yes, historically, but Australia is very much an extraction-based economy still. I mean, we are a huge exporter of coal. We're a huge exporter of uranium and bauxite, iron ore. You know, vast areas of Australia are mining, and a lot of it done on Indigenous land. And I think that, you know, there's a lot of conversation going on here about what that means. But I mean, the great outcome with former Phantasma was, I mean, just that simple thing with the public where most people really have no idea that there's gold inside their mobile phone or within their electronics, and that and that most companies can't tell you where that gold comes from. So I mean, that is a fact. And you know, there are only, I mean, even the big electronics companies are now shifting towards this idea. Maybe, I mean, that's the statistic in More Stream is really interesting, is, you know, by 2080 we will have mined all of the metal in the surface of the earth, and the only metal will remain on the surface. And that's where we came up with this idea of ore streams, of these kind of rivers of metal that flow in supply chains around the world.
Well, Simone, this is a great image to have on the screen as we're talking about ecological.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is an image of the Buenos Aires-based artist and designer Alexandra Cayogulo, and she's standing on the bank of the Santa Cruz River in Argentina. And I guess a little bit like how we reached out to Simona and Andrea, a former Phantasma, Alexandra was somebody who we were really sort of enamored by her work. Of course, she's known for making hand-tufted wool carpets that depict typically Argentine landscapes, but landscapes that are under threat of vanishing, really, or being sort of transformed in ways that kind of alter the ecology or the environment so significantly. And so we reached out to Alexandra and commenced a conversation, and really that we learnt an awful lot, because she alerted us to the fact that, you know, the Santa Cruz River in Argentina, of how important it is, but that there was a proposed development of two hydroelectricity dams, and it was a highly sort of politically contested development. And she was following, you know, the politics of it very, very closely. And she proposed that she would like to invest in some immersive site research, a field trip that would sort of unfold over a week, if not more, and map and really document the site with a view of making a carpet for the Triennial. So here is the carpet, the Santa Cruz River. And if we go to the next slide, you can see it installed in the Triennial.
Incredible.
It is a really amazing work, and I think here it is. And what we really loved about Alexandra, she's a fourth generation carpet maker. So carpet making is in the family, and she draws on all of the I guess the history and traditions of carpet making, but she also acts as a cultural commentator, and she's sort of, I guess, trying to broach issues that are somewhat politically sensitive in her own country. And so they're not simply maps or documents of a land area. They're kind of offering to audiences that know very little of probably what's happening in Argentina, a really intimate, visceral, sensorial engagement with the land, and it kind of, I don't know, I find this work, you know, for me it's a very visceral work. And I mean, you and myself and our colleague Miff, we worked very closely with Alexandra over a period of time, and she would constantly be sending us drawings and photographs, and because they kayaked, Alexandra and her partner Jose, and studio members, and I think they also took I think a couple of other people with them, but they spent 7 days and they kayaked down the river. And the material that they brought away as a result of that research is quite extraordinary and could fill an exhibition. But I guess all of that research has sort of been, directed into this piece. But if we go to the next slide, you can see everybody lying on it. So, you know, Alexandra talks about how, you know, carpets are spaces or sites for social gatherings, and they have been throughout history. And so she was really adamant that she wanted people to be able to lie on it. It was really interesting because the day that the Triennial launched, we were there with a small sort of a few members from the media, and Alexandra took a phone call, and it was somebody from Buenos Aires who called to tell her that the proposed development had been approved and that it was going ahead, and she sat down on the rug and she caressed the land with her hand, and it was such an incredible moment. And then afterwards we all went up and sort of, you know, sort of put our arm around her because she was visibly moved, and she said to me, she said, "This is no longer a map, this is a prayer for the land." And so I guess, you know, for us it's a really excellent reminder of just how the practitioner or the creative really embeds themselves in the work that they produce, but also the pleasure that the public derive from the work, but also just the really potent or pertinent narrative that the work carries in relationship to now, and thinking more broadly about the world and the relationship that is, you know, ineffectual in a sense that we have with such important sites.
Well, you know, that's powerful story. Also tells us something about design as a way of looking, and this is a completely different project, Nendo, compared with MC Escher, but there's maybe a little bit of a common thread there in the sense that Nendo provided a kind of optic through which the work of this extremely famous artist, beloved by the public, MC Escher, could be viewed anew. Which set new images. Now we're going through some recent and then future projects rather than just focusing on commissions specifically. But Ewan, would you like to say a little bit about this exhibition?
Well, look, yeah, I mean, this was a fantastic exhibition. I mean, you can see not only spatially, but I mean, it was sort of one of those moments which things just come together so well, where I remember we had a meeting with our directors, and we had an opportunity to show a very significant collection of MC Escher's work from the Gemens Museum in The Hague. So there was an interest in thinking, which we'd been involved with to some extent, in thinking about that kind of exhibition design, the way that I mean, one of the things that happened when we started the department is we were also very clear that if we're going to have a department of contemporary design as an institution, we needed to lead with design ourselves. So not just through exhibitions and collecting, but actually the way that design is embedded across the institution, and that's with lots of other departments. But there was an opportunity to invite a design studio or an architect to work on the exhibition design for Escher. We put forward Nendo Okisato and his studio. Pretty much that was the only practice we put forward, because there just seemed to be such an amazing synergy between Nendo's practice and the kind of their spatial curiousness, the sort of humor embedded in the work, even though Escher was not necessarily a humorous guy. But the manifestation, the images that you're seeing here it was a big exhibition. I think it's one of the largest Escher shows in the world, exclusive to the NGV. But what Oki didn't do was create a kind of expected sort of spatial gymnastics inspired by all of the Escher work, but he really wanted to create and collaborate with Escher, and he created this image is a perfect example. He talks about it being a home for Escher, and something as sort of like being inside Escher's mind rather than being in an exhibition about Escher. So they created this motif of the house, which is the sort of fundamental sort of representative icon of space in the world today. And then this manifests across all kinds of different spaces within the exhibition, looking through different parts of Escher's practice, and then culminating in a beautiful set of objects that are created, sort of these what are very high quality maquettes of those spatial kind of investigations, which are a set of now of Nendo works that we uniquely hold in the collection. It's a fantastic exhibition. I mean, the images are great, but spatially just such an exhilarating show, and I think really sort of changed people's perception of Escher as well. Sort of brought Escher into a really contemporary sort of conversation. And he was always sort of an outlier in the arts community. But also a hero within many areas of architecture and design. So it's sort of bringing that all together. It was a wonderful commission, and to be able to work so deeply with what we believe is one of the most exciting design studios in the world. I mean, they were just amazing to work with, and the output was a sensational show. Sort of a shame in a way that it just existed for those 4 or 5 months, but for the people who saw it, it was really good. Yeah,
it just completely changed your perspective because of its sheer boldness in setting the scenography for these works. It changes your perspective of what curators and designers can actually do for historic works of art. But it reminds me of something you said earlier when we were talking about the relationship between Campana brothers and their various artisanal partners and artistic partners in the Indigenous communities in Australia, that it's working with rather than working for. And I feel like there's a kind of counterpartness going on in this project. And that brings us back to this topic of working with communities and this fantastic project, which is called Simone.
Yes, this is a really special project, and bear with me. I mean, I do get verbal diarrhea at the best of times, but this is a story, and so it's really is. So look, it's these are works, these are cabinets, and they're made by an artist collective that go by the name of Marep Pamle, which in Miriam means bamboo family. And Marep Pamle live on Mare in the Torres Strait. And so this was a project that we delivered really, or carried out with our colleagues in the Department of Indigenous Art, NGV, and also in partnership with 3 other organisations, and in partnership with the community of Mare, which is a vibrant, extraordinary community of 500 people that live on Mare, which is also known as Murray Island. And here it is here. So Murray Island is the most northeastern part of Australia. So if you imagine the Great Barrier Reef, well, Mare sits right at the tip, and it's a volcanic island, and it's only about 5 square kilometres. So here it is, it's extraordinary. And the project evolved, I guess, over about a period of about 3 years, but we were invited by a really well-respected community member called Ava Noah to work with them to develop and deliver a designer maker workshop which focused on the bamboo that grew on the island, and work with him and the community to develop I guess a framework, a methodology, and an opportunity for intergenerational knowledge sharing. So on Mare, you have a community of elders that have incredible deep knowledge and understanding of craft and material practices. I mean, Mare is renowned for, I guess, being able to execute and carry out their customary practices with great exuberance, everything from dancing to singing to even their agricultural and the fishing practices are really strong. And so we worked for about 3 years to help this community and this group of 18 artists of Marep Pamle create a workshop scenario that went for 4 weeks on Mare. So I had the extraordinary privilege to live in community on Mare with 5 of my colleagues from the Cairns Art Gallery, from Gabtatui Cultural Centre, and we also took a Melbourne furniture designer and maker of some renown called Damien Wright with us, and we set up a timber workshop that was tailored for bamboo. We worked with the elders and the artists through a co-design process to work up the typologies and the designs. So part of the challenge for the community was that they knew that they wanted to reinvigorate the practice of making functional objects from bamboo from their island. And I guess the practice it's not lost, but it's just been slowly disappearing over the years, because the typical way that the skills would be passed on, it's been fractured for a whole variety of reasons. And the community wanted some assistance. And I guess I had been to Mare in 2017 and met Avon and the community, and they said, "Oh, would you help us deliver a workshop, and would you come back and do it with us?" So we did. So all these works were made in basically 3.5 weeks. So. And each one of them speaks of a special story, which is very dear to the Miriam people, about the sky, the sea, and the land. So on the left-hand side, we have a cabinet that's talking about the monsoon winds and the 2 different birds that fly in the sky. So the Miriam people know that they're going to get northerly winds and monsoon rain. And on the right, we have Abu Peris, which has 36 feathers hand carved out of bamboo, and they represent the feather from the Torres Strait dove. So the face of the cabinets reference the traditional Miriam dance mask that traditionally Miriam warriors would hold and wear when they'd go out fighting. And so they're incredible objects, and I think, to the point beforehand, when we talk about we talk about Indigenous artists, we can't separate craft and material from concept and idea. They're interlinked, and so I guess the conversations that evolved over the workshop over the 4 weeks was all about paying respect to the material, letting the material speak, and not pushing the material to say something that it didn't want to say. And I think, as somebody who's a formally trained designer, it was the most incredible masterclass of my life, because I just start to think completely differently about not only designing but making.
I feel like that principle about craft and concept being inextricable from one another is almost a principle that we need to relearn from communities like this. So it's such a great project.
No, completely.
We're almost out of time, guys, which we knew would happen.
Okay.
Material. Let's just go quite quickly now through 3 future projects. We'll just sort of touch quickly on each of them, starting here with Tallinn. So Ewan, do you want to explain quickly?
Sure. Okay. Look. Yeah. I mean, I think these 3 projects really. I suppose what the audience will get is a sort of sense of a trajectory and a continuum, and an area where we're kind of honing our skills and specializing. Tallinn is a designer based in Dubai. She's a Syrian woman from Aleppo originally. We sort of saw her work. I think it was an article that Tallinn Hasbar wrote in Disegno about work that she was doing, where she was dropping these kind of cages into the ocean and letting calcification and letting organisms grow onto these cages. And as an investigation about this sort of idea of collaborating with the natural world. And so we've been working with Tallinn now for the last 1.5 years on this body of work, this is the work as it is finished to come to the NGV Triennial, which opens in December. there's a set of 5 standing chandeliers, which I've got a man-made frame, beautifully realized by Tallinn. And then she's been dropping these frames into the ocean off Dubai over the last year to encourage this organic growth, which then she sort of treats with sunlight to sort of kill off the living organism, and what we're left with is kind of these beautiful decorative objects, which are really a question about how we work. With a whole section within the next triennial about this idea of working in collaboration with nature and thinking about work that could be partially made by the human and then completed by the natural world, or you know, sort of. And for us, they're questioning, you know, the fossil fuel world we live in. If you think about Dubai, and areas, which is this next slide, which you're showing, is of a similar question, which again, a designer, we've followed his work. We love the object he's been making, based around sort of loofah emerged in the Dead Sea with salt growing onto that, and this deep investigation he's done through he's doing a PhD, but his work at Eindhoven, looking at salt as a material. So we approached Erez, and he's actually working on a fairly epic project. The question within the work is, there's 20 million tons of salt produced as a byproduct of desalination in the Dead Sea and the Jordan River, where Israel gets a lot of its fresh water from. So this salt is a sort of byproduct which is polluting the environment. And his question, which is quite simple but important, is why can't salt be a material for architecture? And why can't we think of, you know, we think about our relationship with concrete, which really is a problematic material, but so fundamental to the way that we create urban structures. Could salt be a material that is akin to this? So Erez is working on, it's actually a, I think there's a sketch maybe in the next slide. It's a series of elements over, you know, sort of like a long span, a ladder, a boulder, a set of, a walkway, and a set of blocks in salt, which are all different articulations of sort of emerging out of the water and walking towards this sort of new future. But Erez is literally working on this as we speak. The ladder that is drawn here has been lifted out of the Dead Sea. Yesterday, he WhatsApped me and said, the ladder is out of the water. I mean, these are blocks of salt. So you can see how this material could very much be, these could be bricks within an architectural structure. And this is a boulder which is sourced, which is, I think, 1.5 tons or 2 tons, which becomes part of the work as this kind of, again, this element that is very much a sort of visceral, natural object. And we're really, I think Simone and I are both fascinated by the natural world, by our relationship with nature, and recalibrating that, and sort of investigating how design could heal rather than harm. And so not just drawing attention to problems, but actually thinking about solutions, because I think we're drowning in problems. What we need is we need solutions, we need positivity, and we need to inspire people that there are, you know, really tangible ways of addressing some of the issues around us. And even if this is a small scale thing, but it sort of opens up the sort of conversation about being more curious about how we might work with the natural world.
Great. So that's Erez Navipana, to give his full name. I'm not sure.
Yes.
Yes.
And now you have to help me with the pronunciation of this, but I think it's Pirjo Haikola. Is that right? It's our last example.
Yeah, Ewan, I think you're on a roll. Do you want to continue talking?
Okay, I can quickly.
Yeah.
I'm working on this one. Pirjo Haikola.
Yeah.
So Pirjo is originally Finnish. She's actually just moved to Australia in the last couple of years, and is working as a design educator at RMIT University, which is one of the key design schools in Australia. And we got into a conversation about sea urchins. She's an industrial designer and a diving instructor. And when she arrived in Victoria, she started diving because she loves diving. She's very interested in underwater ecologies. there's this interesting situation happening globally where sea urchin populations are exploding because of warmer waters and increased nutrients from agricultural runoff. So she's actually working on a project for the Triennial where she's 3D printing coral structures that are made from sea urchins. So she's looking at a way of turning the urchin, which is literally, there are millions and millions of these creatures just eating all of the vegetation in the ecosystems around Melbourne and Tasmania, and also in California, I might add. The only way of really addressing it is to remove the sea urchins from the site. She's investigating whether the material of the urchin itself, its calcium carbonate shell, and the natural chemicals within that, it's actually a very interesting material. And she's 3D printing coral structures, and these are being tested for reef restoration on the Great Barrier Reef, as ways of regenerating dying and bleached corals. So it's sort of what we've invested in a research project. The objects become a kind of a window into that project, but this is now it's become, I suppose, since its inception, it's become a much broader and larger research project where Pyrio is actually working with a major reef restoration research on the Barrier Reef, which is quite exciting for us. And I mean, she's a really amazing person to work with. She's collected 2,000 sea urchins herself, scuba diving.
It's a very unique skill set.
We've got a sort of penchant for wild places and sending people off on crazy adventures. It's great fun.
But I guess we have an appetite for a journey, and I guess because, to be honest, we often don't know what the work is going to be when we start the conversation with the designer. And I remember, Ewan, if I can reveal, even with Former Phantasma, 6 months out from the Triennial, we still really didn't know what we were going to receive. So I guess, but we're thrill seekers. We love going on that journey, and I guess because of the backgrounds that we come from, we understand creative process. So it's not something that intimidates us or scares us. We enjoy it, and of course, when the work is delivered, it's all the more rewarding because you've been able to understand that the work has arrived because of a serious amount of investment intellectually, sort of emotionally,
and trusting people
from the designer.
Trusting. I mean, we're lucky.
Yes.
Our directors,
you got to trust.
Our directors trust us to, and we have to provide reassurance. Sometimes it's okay. It's all gonna be okay. But trusting people and investing in people who have the talent and the capability and deserve the opportunity. I suppose we're really committed to that idea of creating opportunities for people to realize work that is important, work that needs to be made. And we don't see enough of that happening. You can't rely on practices to just generate these projects on their own. How do they live? How do they fund this? We're aware that a lot of other institutions around the world struggle to be able to fund that kind of thing, and we understand that, and we collaborate with other institutions as well. And it's not about, it's just a lucky triangulation between research partners we have at the universities in Australia, great philanthropy, fantastically supportive directors who have created a really unique moment, and we're just making hay while the sun shines, I suppose.
Well, unfortunately, we are at the end of our time, and it's funny that you would end on that note because it is the depths of night where you are.
It's
finished just by.
It is. It's 2 a.m.
Let's not even think about it. But listen, we really, really appreciate the time that you've spent with us tonight, this morning. And also, of course, the incredible effort and vision that you've been putting into the program at the NGV. It really is something to learn from. And I hope many, many people around the world will be able to see this talk, but also the Triennial coming up in December. Great that that's happening. And of course, learn about some of the other projects that you've already completed. As Lucy's just mentioned in the chat, on Friday we'll have Domitilla Dardi, staying with museums actually. She's at the Maxi in Rome, and she's going to be speaking about a project called Casa Mondo, which is a very innovative digital sort of online delivery system for design. So some comparisons could be drawn to what we've been talking about today, but also it's another different world, as every time in design dialogue. So listen, thanks again very, very much, Simone and Ewan. It's been a great pleasure.
Pleasure. Thanks so much, Glenn.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Mark and Lucy and the team at Friedman Bender. You're making, this is a great series. And I mean, yes, we're all a bit sick of watching the TV, but you know, this is, it's really worthwhile.
We don't tire of this series.
So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you on Friday.